Thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to be here. I was actually speaking on this online platform a few years ago as well, and I'm really impressed with the whole online setup for the global PropTech online initiative. So it's been cool to follow the whole setup. And today's topic is the Nordic PropTech scene, and to discuss a little bit around that. But also, just to give you guys a little bit of background, I was working as a corporate lawyer for many years in Norway, and founded some different kind of initiatives. And one initiative for young people in real estate in Norway. And then we together with the startup scene in 2017 we started the PropTech Norway initiative. So I came from more of the investment background and knew a lot of the real estate owners, and we matched them up with a lot of these PropTech companies and started the PropTech initiative. And from there, I was picked up by WeWork. So the past year has been pretty exciting, and that was something I was one of the reasons I was invited to speak as well, was on behalf of WeWork, as I was a director for the Nordics and the Baltics and the Netherlands, and we had a massive expansion the whole of 2019. But in February, I decided to pursue other options in Norway to have more time here locally and not cut down on the travel. So I'm now working at Wiersholm, which is a Norwegian law firm, and working with real estate and PropTech from that kind of angle. But I promised Walter that I would speak a little bit about WeWork and what I will speak about is what actually was done right with all the space planning and the building and management tools they had. Because I feel, even though I moved on myself, I feel like some of the really strong sides of the WeWork platform as well was a little bit under communicated. So I will definitely speak a little bit on that. So I will put this into two parts. The first one will be about the Nordic PropTech scene and in building and management plan and build frame, and then we will speak about what could we learn from WeWork in types of space planning, and perhaps give you some insights on what could be used there on the PropTech side. And PropTech Norway, not to say a lot about that, but we have been very active the past years. And one thing to just take with you from this talk is that we are now working to set up a Nordic PropTech initiative together with PropTech Sweden, PropTech Finland, and PropTech Denmark. Because we think that the Nordics is kind of a region that should collaborate, and we actually heard this from someone from the Baltics who run a Baltic PropTech initiative, and they say that well, no one cares if you're from Estonia or Lithuania. We just call ourselves PropTech Baltics, and you should be the Nordic PropTech initiative or the PropTech Nordics. And we actually thought about it. We have a lot of the same kind of investors and the same kind of companies working with us. So we tried to now to set up a more kind of a collaboration with and gathered our initiative under the same kind of umbrella. And just to give you a status for the PropTech scene in Norway, it's been a good traction before the COVID crisis now. As a company that you may have heard about, this Spacemaker, who has an amazing product for planning building sites. And they have now gotten a lot of international investors, and now one of the largest real estate owners in France is actually joining them. And also Unlock, they are using digitalizing keys, and there's been a big fuss around this, but Unlock is scaling pretty fast and getting big investors on their side now and landing deals with the largest real estate owners as well. And then we have Immerso, who's doing a 3D scanning product, which also has landed some big kind of deals. So there's a lot of activity in the Nordic or Norwegian market. So these are something that you could look up, but they are also been a high investment activity. So it's good to bring that with you, even though it's really slowed down in March. It's been a roller coaster ride. There's been a lot of discussions about the new government aid in Norway, but one positive thing to come out of it is that we see that businesses are pushed in the digitalization mode and towards that. And also one really interesting thing, because there's a lot of space plan and building PropTech tools that you can use, but one that's really been taken off for now is things that has to do with contact and the building site itself, because you used to have all the meetings physically, and then overnight you had to do all of them digitally. And there's a lot of companies that's actually been pushing these platforms for years, like BuildSafe and other companies. And now, just over a course of a few weeks, all meetings on the building sites are being done remotely, and then all the documentations are shared in the same platform as well. And then suddenly the push in the contact to the one push in the contact industry is just happened overnight, and we see that really strongly in Norway. And this is just an overview of some of the interesting companies we have. But I would say that in the planning and building industry from the Nordics, you can bring with you some of the items we have here, and that's the SpaceMaker, the AI platforms from SpaceMaker, and Immerso's 3D scanning products to 3D scan buildings there and then. It's been really taken off. And then also, as I said, on the building site, things that is actually happening on site to share data, these platform technologies that are not that high tech and hard to make, but they're still being used in a more interesting ways. And in Norway also we see that AR and VR is being used for a lot of new purposes. And this has been actually a push from the oil and gas sector in Norway, because that's the strongest industry we had. And as you know, it's been ups and downs here, but a lot of the technology used on the oil platforms, like Maersk's AR technology, has been so far ahead for years. And since 2015-16, they have actually used AR technology for platform workers walking around on the oil platform with AR glasses and doing the changes and the notes there and then at the site. So and this is technology that has been used for many years in the oil and gas sector. And with a lot of oil and gas workers moving into real estate, a lot of this AR technology is actually being tested out on the building sites as well. And the technology is already there. So we see the push over to the building sites is being dramatically increased now in these COVID days. So that is like some of the takes on the market. And the Nordic market, I think it's strong. It's the government has stepped in with a lot of money, and we have a stable function for going forward. So it's been pretty decent. And in the second part, I also wanted to discuss a bit about the WeWork that I joined and worked in, and then what has been like key points that you can actually with you to different kind of work. And to just give you some of the conclusion, I think that it's been really downplayed, the part of WeWork that's been about the data capture and the data scientists. And one overlooked thing in this IPO memo that people looked at is that it said that WeWork has actually 1,000 people working with data science and data research. And I found that really fascinating that no one has really picked up on it, because there's a lot of people working on data on how to design and set up building sites. So I started in January, and it was kind of a hyper growth period. It was pretty intense and crazy days. And then in the summer, of course, everyone know the IPO failed, and there was a big discussion about that over summer. And then SoftBank took over now in October, and it's been a lot of changes and a lot of things going on. So it's going to be exciting to see how this COVID crisis as well affects this market. I would think that will be an interesting takeaway. But one thing that I really think could work is that you see there is some kind of change to the workforce and how people work and plan building site, how they work. And there's more and more millennials coming in. There's more and more startups and other companies coming into the market. And one thing to notice is that for the co-working scene as well, I think it's interesting to see that 61% of CEOs in different kind of huge international companies do not know how to plan their labor costs 3 years from now. And what does that even mean? That means that, well, 3 years from now, they don't know how many employees they have really. So and then they still enter into a 15-year lease agreement for a whole huge building, and take a bet on that the company is going to be at the equal size. Like take MasterCard, for example. I don't know this business at all, but say that they would have 400 people in Oslo, and they don't know how many people they are in 2 years, and then they still rent a giant room for 15 years, and then they hope it stays a bit stable. And I think that is about to change, and that will affect how you plan and build real estate, because how can you set it up and make buildings more efficient if you know people are actually going to stay there for shorter periods of time, or they're going to be wanting to change the building there and then. And I think that is a question that we all have to ask ourselves. If you rent real estate, if you build it, or if you use it, because it's going to be a different kind of demand going forward. And just also interesting to see that all these big companies are signing up not only to WeWork, but to other of these kind of co-working and flex office providers as well, and they're taking up much space. So, but they still have short contracts, and you all know co-working, of course. But what does this mean for how you plan and build real estate? Well, all these big companies as well wants more flexibility, and you have to build it differently if they're only renting for 2 to 3 years. And if this is a big tendency in the market, I think the use of data and to capture data to try to figure out how people actually use their space and then adapt the space to the actual use of the end user of the building. It's very interesting to see. And of course, one part of it was about the nice buildings and design. I think that is kind of a universal trait for what all businesses want to try to accomplish. But the most interesting thing is how you can build space that people would actually use to gather, and this sets new kind of criteria for how to set up the whole structure of the building. And this is of course from the football championship in France. The big surprise that all the French are watching this. But on the other hand, something must attract them to want to stay out with these people. It looks like a group of friends, but there is actually a picture of them with all their colleagues from the building, working in different banks and law firms, and they rather stay here and watch the football match with the people in the building than to go home or go out to the streets. And that's because of partly because of how WeWork has used the data to figure out how to structure space. And that's something that is interesting to see. And then you can build more of a global community. I will not go into like the more co-working platform technology, but the building itself, you also have to rethink it a little bit, because when you plan a building, you also have to plan for the global community that the building is part of. And I think this will also be more and more interesting for a lot of landlords. If you see all of these, for example, products that are bundling gym memberships to give you access to all the gyms in the city through one kind of provider, and this could be used for offices and for all other companies as well. I think the buildings needs to be designed a bit different as well if you have these kind of new platforms for the buildings. And of course, experience in the buildings are interesting, but my general idea here, and this is the thing I'm most passionate about, is that what can you do if you have the largest data set in the world, in the world's largest asset class? And this actually hit me really hard when I started thinking about it, because I've been working previously with some of the best builders, designers in the Nordics at least, and it really struck me that they only take the 3 previous projects and they work with top people, but they take the 3-4 previous projects and they build based on their experience on that, but they don't have any data on how many chairs should you have in the room, how high should the roof be, what kind of lamps should you have. It's based on experience and other things, but it's not based on data. And I think this data mindset is something that we will see more and more when you plan and build real estate. And this is what I found really interesting with the WeWork approach, because I think the future of work could be awesome if you handle all the insights. And this is also one lesson I learned, because when I started PropTech in Norway, we were always talking about sensors and all of these kind of technologies to obtain data actively all the time for buildings. And of course, if you have sensors under every chair and in every staircase and every wall, then you can know exactly how people move in that building. But what if no one processes that data? Like, you have a lot of data, live data on the building, but no one has time to go through it. And the approach in the WeWork's design team was kind of different. It was more based on that you take a hypothesis and then you take out some part of the building, and then you make a project around it, like how many people should be in the meeting room center, for example, or how can you predict the occupancy in a building, or will stairs influence social networks? And this is kind of a good illustration for it, because the approach was never to have sensors in every single building in the world, but it was more take out some parts of it and then find out if you have data that could give you some kind of interesting insights, and then you can use that for the other buildings. So you go through the say you take the top 20 buildings and you ask yourself, these 20 buildings are planned, working really well. They must be planned pretty well. What are the common threads in these buildings? And then you go through this and you see that perhaps these three things are commonality in these 20 buildings. Let us take those three things and test it out on the other buildings, and then you found out, well, it didn't help you a lot on the other buildings, but perhaps one thing helped, and then you could use that going forward. So, for example, if one question was that if stairs would influence social networks, and what you had was a finding where you found out that if you have narrow hallways in a building, and then if you have a lot of internal staircases, it will be you would have 1.5 times more likelihood of people becoming friends in that building than if the hallways were wider and if the stairs were fewer. And this surprised some of the scientists because they didn't really know the answer to it, but it was statistically significant. So you knew kind of that it was a fact. But what they later found out was that if you have kind of a narrow hallways, for example, then it's more likely that people will say hi to each other in the building, and that could boost the amount of friendships. Or if you have more staircases, then people will meet in those set staircases, and over time, and as more of a meta effect, people will become friends in that building. But if you didn't really start to investigate and look for commonalities in the building and the data, then you would never find out these things. Another interesting thing was the kitchen areas, I think, because one asked a lot of people in a huge survey, like, what kind of break areas do you like? And people said, well, I like to have lounge chairs, and I like to have TV and coffee and a fireplace and all of these things. But what people really did was to imagine how they had it at home. So even the data that we got in the analysis was not correct. So what they found they did was to try to measure movements in some buildings to see where people actually took their breaks. And the research showed that 38% of the people, the largest group, took all their breaks in the kitchen areas. And then you build kitchen areas, but you don't build them because you think it's like that. You actually know it's like that, even though people don't even respond that on the survey. So it's a kind of an interesting way to think about buildings. And this, I'm talking about sensors and all of that to find this data, but it's something that all landlords could try to look for. And I also looked at this slide. It's about the shapes of the rooms, and you tried now to match people that are using buildings and match the shape of the rooms, and then they're trying to find out, like, does the shape of the room affect what kind of company should be in that room? And if so, can we make an algorithm to get some companies to target companies better based on these room shapes, for example? So that it was kind of interesting. And down the same line, they also asked a lot of people, what kind of colors do you like in the common areas? And if you see the early reworks, for example, you see a lot of bright, like blue and red colors that were all over. And people responded on the surveys that they liked red and blue and all these colors. But then you tested people with brain scanners and VR simulations of different reworks. And it actually showed that the brain actually reacted negatively to that blue color that they thought they liked consciously, and they actually liked this yellow color you see there. So that was kind of interesting to see that insight coming true, and that also shows that people are not responding what is actually true. It's you have to do deeper analysis on this. So I think that the approach to working with more deep analysis of certain issues, like you test some hypothesis, and then you try to qualify it, and then you will find a good solution. I think that will be a bigger part of space planning than more kind of having sensors all over the building and measuring movement with heat-seeking cameras. I don't think that will be the solutions. I think that could be kind of like you set up sensors for 3 weeks, and then you see what kind of data that gives you, and you take them down, and then you can use that to learn. But I don't think most people have enough capacity to handle all the data. And one interesting fact here as well, because all the landlords says, well, we don't have brain scanners or sensors or all this kind of thing to counter test kind of hypotheses. But then you can take an easy example. So in planning meeting rooms, for example, globally, a lot of people, we had a pretty high satisfactory score, but in China and in Brazil and Argentina, people were dissatisfied, and they were kind of different jurisdictions. So we didn't really know at the time what was wrong. And then you started testing this, and and this is very easy. No scanners or anything involved. You have a meeting room app, then you put in amount of people, and then you put in when you are going into the room and when you how long you need it, and then you scan it when you go in and out, and that's it. And my point is that every landlord could measure this. For example, like you could have a system to see when people enter meeting rooms, how many people there are, and how long they actually spend there. And what they found out just from that easy data, from available data from that, was that in China, people were sitting in meetings, and the meetings were full of people, and they were running over time. And so people were complaining about of bad air and food from the previous meetings and stuff being in the room. But in Brazil and Argentina, people were actually notoriously showing up late for meetings and sitting over their time. So the dissatisfactory score came when people people were coming to the meeting rooms and someone were sitting there, and there was kind of an argument. And how did we solve that? Well, what they did was they found out that these are more cultural differences, but it's based on data, so we know that's facts. So in China, then you have to send a message to the community team at once when the meeting is over, and then they run over and they try to air it out and pick up all the food. And in new buildings, we plan with way more bigger meeting rooms and with more air conditions. So that was kind of affecting the space planning. And then in Brazil and Argentina, they actually had more available meeting rooms than we would usually have, just to attend. So if meeting room A and B are busy, then you can send them to meeting room C and so forth. So that was very interesting data. That but it shows that I think a lot of landlords going forward will be much more concerned with data and how to use insights from the buildings to plan better. And you don't necessarily need all that high-tech heat-seeking cameras and all that stuff to make informed decisions, but you should make decisions based on data and not based on your gut feeling, really. And that is the case today. So I think this is some of the most interesting slides I know. You have experiences, you get the data, but then you need to make predictions out of the data, and you need people to do that. And then you add that to get more experiences, you get more data, and then so on. And I think that approach will be the approach to plan space in the future. And I really don't think people, even the biggest and best landlords, are doing this today. And there's a lot of potential for good companies to go into that space. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Henrik. Thank you very much for that. We're close to time now, but there were some questions that came in, and I'll pick one of these to go through. essentially, how are co-working spaces going to change because of COVID-19? I think that might be a question that you've probably gotten a lot of recently.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question because on one hand, I think a lot of these companies will struggle with people not wanting the dense space was the high density, and that was really some of the key factors to how to make it. But I think I really truly don't believe that people will be sitting at home working every day. People still want office space. Perhaps the big companies don't need to send everyone to the main office downtown. They could perhaps have perhaps 3 days in the main office or 2 days, and then the rest is up to you. And I think in that case, a lot of more freelancers or big companies send their employees to work as freelancers in different kind of co-working spaces. So I think co-working will still be able to benefit from the COVID crisis, definitely.